Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into Dan Heath's book, Reset: How to Change What's Not Working. Do you ever
Yeah.
get that feeling like you're just stuck with something that's not working right?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it's like a work process or just some habit you can't kick. Well, this book is all about how to break free from those ruts and make a real lasting change.
It's fascinating how he really tackles this whole thing. He
Yeah.
starts off by acknowledging all the human reasons why we kind of cling to what's familiar, even when it's not really working for us anymore.
Yeah. It's not just about laziness or lack of willpower or something.
Mm.
There's deeper stuff going on.
Yeah, there's deeper psychological things there.
Yeah.
One of the first things he introduces is this idea of invisible defaults.
Uh-huh.
And these are the things we do automatically without even questioning whether they're even effective anymore. So think about it this way. You're driving to work.
Okay.
You always take the same route. Even if there's construction or tons of traffic, you're so used to it you don't even consider other options.
That's a great analogy. I love that.
Right.
Because it's not just driving routes. It could be anything, like how we interact with our families or how we run meetings at work or
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Really.
Tons of stuff.
And Heath argues that these invisible defaults, a lot of times they're really rooted in these things called cognitive biases,
Okay.
like anchoring bias, where we just rely too much on the first piece of info we get, or status quo bias, where we favor just whatever's happening right now just because it's familiar.
So our brains are kind of tricking us into sticking with what we know, even if it's not the best way anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the first step to kind of breaking free is just awareness. We got to learn how to spot these invisible defaults in our own lives.
So how do we do that? I mean, does he have a trick or a tip?
Yeah.
Or how do we start to notice that?
He gives us this really cool tool called the default detector.
Okay.
And it's basically a series of questions that help you challenge your assumptions, your habits. For example, he asks, how long have you been doing things this way?
And what would happen if you just stopped doing it that way?
Interesting.
It forces you to step back and really look at those super ingrained patterns.
So we've identified those invisible defaults. We've figured out the things that aren't working anymore. How do we actually change them? Because that can feel kind of overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Right.
And that's where his approach is really great. He doesn't advocate for some huge overnight transformation.
Yeah.
Instead, he really emphasizes this power of what he calls minimum viable resets.
Minimum viable resets. Okay.
Yeah, it's about taking that really big, daunting change and breaking it down into these small, manageable experiments.
I like that.
So think about it this way. Imagine you're trying to eat healthier.
Okay.
You could overhaul your entire diet. But instead, what you could do is just start swapping out soda for water with every meal.
Okay. So small changes that are actually doable.
That's a minimum viable reset right there.
Okay.
You test it out, you see how it feels, and then you adjust it if you need to.
Yeah. I love that because it takes the pressure off of being perfect right away, too.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I don't have to suddenly become a health nut.
Exactly.
Just one step at a time.
He gives an example of this in action with a school district that's having trouble with student absenteeism.
Okay.
Instead of coming up with this massive program that's really expensive and everything,
Yeah.
they decided to start with a pilot program.
Okay.
Where they just made phone calls, personalized phone calls, to parents of students who were missing a lot of school.
Interesting.
So they started small, right? And they focused on a specific thing.
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, what happened? Did it work?
It worked really well.
Really?
Attendance rates got a lot better.
Yeah.
And so because of that initial success, they
Yeah.
were able to make the program bigger.
Okay, so it's you prove the concept first.
Yeah.
On a small scale.
Yeah, you test it out,
And then if it worked,
you go bigger.
you
Okay.
go bigger.
Exactly. It's not about coming up with this big, huge plan and just hoping it's going to work.
Right.
It's more about experimenting, learning as you go, and improving as you go.
I like that. There's another thing I really like from the book is this idea of involving stakeholders
Yes,
in the change process.
absolutely.
So that's whether it's your employees or your customers or whoever's affected by the change,
Mm-hmm.
they need to feel a sense of ownership.
Yeah.
They got to feel like they're a part of it.
Exactly.
And, if they are part of the solution, they're going to be way more likely to embrace the new way of doing things.
You're not just forcing change on them, you're actually making them part of it.
Right. You're inviting them in.
Exactly.
Think about that.
And that makes a huge difference when it comes to making those changes last.
Absolutely. So we've talked about identifying those invisible defaults and then designing these minimum viable resets.
Right.
But even with a great plan in place, actually, making that transition can be tough.
Right. It's the toughest part. That's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Yeah.
Implementation. That's where most of those well-intentioned changes
Fall apart.
fall apart.
Yeah.
Totally.
He uses a really interesting example in the book about a hospital system that was trying to reduce medical errors.
Mm.
They had all these new protocols and everything, but the staff just kept falling back into old habits,
Mm-hmm.
especially when they were under pressure.
It really highlights this point that you just can't announce a change and expect everybody to magically adapt like right away.
Yeah,
It's a process.
it takes time.
Consistent effort.
Yeah. So what are some of the key elements?
Attention.
What are some of the key elements for effective implementation? Like, what does he recommend?
Well, one of the biggest is just clear, consistent communication.
Okay.
Everyone who's affected by this change needs to know what's happening,
Yeah.
why it's happening, what they need to do.
Yeah.
And that communication has to keep going.
It's not just like a one-time announcement. It's got to be
No, it's got to be all the way through,
ongoing.
throughout the whole process. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not just telling people what to do. It's about bringing them along.
Right.
Right? And
Exactly.
explaining why.
Yeah. And that leads right into another important idea here.
Okay.
Adaptive leadership.
Okay.
It's all about having empathy, understanding people's perspective.
So like people who might be resistant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Seeing things from their point of view.
That's a hard one for a lot of leaders.
It is.
They just expect everyone to be on board.
Mm-hmm.
What's your advice for leaders on that? How can they get better at that?
Heath suggests asking yourself, what are their concerns? What are they afraid of?
Yeah.
Try to put yourself in their shoes,
Hmm.
And sometimes that resistance is actually really good feedback.
Interesting.
It could highlight problems with your plan that you didn't see
Yeah.
or areas where you need to provide more support.
Yeah. So it's not a bad thing, necessarily.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's actually very helpful.
It can be helpful. Okay. So we got to meet people where they are
Mm-hmm.
instead of forcing them to fit into our vision of how it should be.
Exactly.
Okay. How do you create that kind of environment where people feel safe enough to actually embrace the change,
Mm-hmm.
especially if they're worried about making mistakes, which people usually are?
Oh, yeah. And that's where this idea of psychological safety is huge.
Look, yeah.
People got to feel like they can speak up, they can share ideas,
Mhm.
they can make mistakes without being punished for it.
Yeah.
If you're always worried about being judged or criticized,
Right.
you're less likely to take risks and try new things.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's all about fostering a culture of trust and openness where
Mhm.
people feel comfortable experimenting, learning.
Yeah.
And it really all starts at the top
With leadership.
with leadership. Yeah. Leaders have to do what they're asking other people to do.
Right. They got to model it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they don't really buy into the change, nobody else will.
Actions speak louder than words kind of
Yeah.
thing. Okay.
Yeah.
But how do you balance that with accountability, right?
Right.
Like, how do we make sure people are actually doing things the new way?
Accountability is super important,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to be all about punishment,
Right.
Heath suggests focusing on positive reinforcement,
Okay.
recognizing people when they're doing the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
rewarding people for embracing the change,
Yeah.
celebrate wins, even the small ones.
Well, that's good.
It keeps morale high and it reinforces the good behaviors.
It's like catching people doing things right instead of always focusing on the negative. Yeah.
You got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But even with all these elements in place,
Yeah.
I mean, there's going to be bumps in the road.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. So
Absolutely.
change is rarely a straight line.
Yeah. How do we deal with that? Because I know that's where a lot of people,
Yeah.
they just kind of give up. They're like, oh, this isn't working.
Yeah.
And they just slide back into the old ways.
The key is to look at those setbacks as chances to learn and grow. Don't get discouraged. Instead, ask yourself, what did I learn here?
Yeah.
How can I do things differently next time?
Okay. So it's about reframing those challenges as opportunities.
Exactly. And
Well,
don't
yeah.
forget, you don't have to go it alone.
Yeah.
Having a good support system, whether it's friends, family, coworkers, can really make all the difference.
It's like having a team of cheerleaders in your corner.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
We all need that, especially when we're trying to make big changes.
That's so true. There's one more thing that I wanted to touch on
Okay.
that I think is really important for successful change. Measurement.
Yes,
No.
so important.
Yeah. It's not enough to just have a plan and hope everything works out.
Right.
You actually have to track how it's going
Absolutely.
and make adjustments along the way.
Yeah. You need a way to see if things are actually working and to fix things that aren't.
Okay. What's the best way to go about that? Like, how do we track these changes?
Heath recommends figuring out what your key metrics are. the ones that really matter for your goals, and then actually track them regularly.
Yeah.
This data can help you figure out what's working, what's not, and where you need to make those changes.
It's like having a dashboard for your change.
Exactly.
Kind of tells you how you're doing.
Yeah,
That's cool. And it sounds like it's also really helpful to celebrate those small wins too, right?
absolutely.
Along the way.
Yeah. It keeps everyone motivated, and it reinforces the positive changes that are happening.
Yeah.
It creates this feeling of momentum,
Ah.
which is super important, especially when things get tough.
Yeah. It's like building a positive feedback loop that kind of helps to sustain the effort over time.
Exactly.
And that's what I really liked about his whole approach in the book.
Yeah.
It's not just about making a one-time change. It's about creating this system
The system, yeah.
that supports and sustains the change over time.
You got it.
Yeah,
And that's what makes it so powerful.
that's really cool. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about that today.
Me too. It's a great book.
Okay, so we talked about those invisible defaults and those minimum viable resets. But even with a great plan, actually doing it, making that change happen, that can be the toughest part.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
It's definitely where the rubber meets the road, for sure.
Yeah. He has this really fascinating example in the book about this hospital system that was trying to, reduce their medical errors.
Mm-hmm.
And they had all these new protocols in place, but the staff kept going back to their old habits, especially when they were under all this pressure.
It really shows you just can't announce a change and then expect everyone to be on board and change overnight.
Right. It doesn't just work like that.
No, it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
You need to put in consistent effort.
So it's a process. It's not like a one-time thing.
And you need to pay attention to it.
Okay, so what are some of the things that we should be focusing on then? What are some of the key elements for actually doing it, implementing that change?
Well, one of the most important things is just making sure there's really good communication that's clear and consistent.
Okay.
Everyone involved has got to know what's going on.
Uh-huh.
They got to know why it's happening and what's expected of them.
Yeah,
And this communication, it can't just happen at the beginning.
right.
It has to keep going the whole time,
It's got to be ongoing throughout the entire thing.
the whole process.
Yeah, you're not just telling people what to do. You're really bringing them along with you, right?
Exactly.
And explaining why this is happening.
Yeah, and this kind of goes with another important idea that he talks about, which is adaptive leadership.
Adaptive leadership.
Yeah, it's about being empathetic
Yeah.
and really understanding everyone's perspective.
So people who might be resisting the change.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's a tough one for a lot of leaders, though, to
Oh,
get,
it is.
they just figure, oh, I told them what to do, now do it.
Mhm.
And it's well, doesn't work like that.
No.
What's your advice for leaders who want to get better at this whole adaptive leadership thing?
Well, he suggests asking yourself, what are their concerns? What are they worried about?
Yeah.
What are they afraid of? Try to imagine being in their situation. Try
Yeah.
to see things from their point of view.
That's tough to do.
It is.
It's hard to step outside yourself like that.
It is, but sometimes that resistance, that pushback you get, it's actually really useful information.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it can help you see problems with your plan that you didn't realize were there,
Yep.
or it can show you places where you need to offer more support.
So it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Not at all. It's actually pretty valuable feedback.
Interesting. So we got to meet people where they are,
Mm-hmm.
not try to force them to fit into our idea of how it should be.
Exactly.
Okay. How do you create that kind of environment, though, where people feel safe enough to really get on board with this change?
Yeah.
Especially when they're probably worried about, making mistakes, which I think a lot of us are.
Yeah, and that's where psychological safety comes in.
Psychological safety is.
It's this feeling of being able to speak up, to share your ideas, even if you're wrong,
Yeah.
and not being punished for it.
Yeah.
Because if you're constantly scared of being judged or criticized, you're not going to want to take risks or try anything new.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So you got to foster this culture where people feel trusted and respected, and where it's okay to be open,
Yeah.
a place where people are comfortable experimenting and learning from each other.
And that all starts with the leadership, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Because if the leaders aren't modeling that behavior,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If they don't buy into it, nobody else will.
You got to walk the talk.
Exactly.
Actions speak louder than words.
For sure.
Okay. So how do you balance that with accountability? Because we still need to make sure people are actually doing things the new way.
Yeah, accountability is super important, but it doesn't have to be all about punishment.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He suggests focusing on the positive stuff, like positive reinforcement.
Okay.
So Recognizing people when they do things right,
Yeah.
rewarding them for embracing the change,
Okay.
celebrating when things go well, even the small things.
That's good.
It keeps people feeling good, it keeps morale up, and it helps reinforce the good behaviors that you want people to keep doing.
So it's like you said earlier, catching people doing things right
Exactly.
instead of focusing on when they mess up.
You got it.
I like that. But even with all of this in place, I mean, there's going to be bumps in the road, right?
Of course, change is hardly ever a straight line.
Yeah. So how do we deal with that? Because I know for me, that's where I get tripped up. I'm like, ugh, this is too hard.
Yeah.
I just want to go back to the old way.
Well, the key is to look at those setbacks as like learning experiences.
Oh.
Don't get all discouraged when things don't go perfectly. Ask yourself, what can I learn from this? How can I approach it differently next time?
Okay. So we're reframing those challenges, those setbacks
Exactly.
as opportunities.
Yeah.
Okay. And we don't have to do this alone, right?
No, not at all. Having people you can lean on, a good support system, whether it's friends, family, people at work, whoever you trust.
Yeah.
It can make such a big difference.
It's like having a bunch of cheerleaders in your corner.
Yeah, exactly.
You need that.
We all need that, especially when we're trying to make big changes.
Yeah. There's one more thing I think is super important for actually making a change successfully. Measurement.
Oh, yeah. So important.
It's not enough to just have a plan and just hope for the best.
You got to keep track of how things are going.
Right. We have to track it, see how it's actually working,
Absolutely.
and make changes along the way if we need to.
You need a way to figure out what's working and what's not so you can fix the stuff that isn't working.
What's the best way to actually track it?
Well, Heath says you should figure out what your most important metrics are.
Okay.
The ones that are really going to show if you're reaching your goals,
Mm-hmm.
and then track those
Oh.
regularly.
Yeah.
And then that data can help you see what's working, what's not, and where you might need to adjust things.
It's almost like having a dashboard for your change efforts.
Exactly. It gives you
Yes.
all that info.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
That's helpful.
And it sounds like it's also really important to, like you said, celebrate those small wins along the way.
Oh, definitely.
Right.
It helps keep people motivated and feeling good about the changes that are happening.
Yeah.
It helps build momentum, which is so important, especially when things get hard.
It's like you're building this positive feedback loop that keeps the whole effort going.
Exactly.
And that's what I really love about his approach.
Yeah.
It's not just about making a one-time change. It's about creating that system
Mm-hmm.
that's going to support the change over time.
You got it.
Yeah.
That's what makes it so powerful.
Yeah. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been talking about Dan Heath's book, Reset. And I got to say, I'm feeling pretty energized by this whole thing.
Yeah, it's been pretty interesting.
Like we've unpacked this whole toolkit for like dealing with those sticky situations that we all have in life that just need a reset.
It is. It's really insightful and also really practical.
Yeah.
He doesn't just give you these like abstract theories.
Right?
He gives you actual tools that you can use.
Yeah, and he does it in such a fun way, too.
Yeah, he does.
Like it's a really engaging book. He uses real-life examples, and he's even kind of funny sometimes.
Yeah. And I think one of the best things about it is how he really challenges that whole New Year's resolution way of thinking,
Oh, yeah, like that all-or-nothing approach.
Yeah, where we set these huge goals and then feel terrible when we don't reach them.
Right, like we set ourselves up for failure
Exactly.
before we even begin.
Yeah. And instead of that, he says we should focus on progress, not perfection.
Yeah.
Start small, experiment, try those minimum viable resets we were talking about.
Exactly. And that's super empowering
That is.
because it takes the pressure off.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we can approach change with more of like a curiosity,
Yeah,
instead of being scared of it.
totally.
It reminds me of that quote, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step."
I love that.
You don't have to have it all figured out from the start.
Nope.
You just have to start.
Yeah.
But, there are going to be those times when you feel like giving up,
Oh, yeah, for
when
sure.
you just want to go back to the old ways of doing things. Because change can be uncomfortable.
It can be scary.
It can be scary, yeah.
And it's okay to feel those things. It's totally normal.
Okay, so we're not wrong for feeling that way.
No, not at all. It's challenging. Change is challenging. Don't let those feelings stop you.
Yeah.
Instead, try to think of them in a different way.
Okay.
Like instead of seeing those setbacks as failures,
Yeah.
see them as opportunities to learn and grow.
So shifting our perspective on it.
Exactly. Ask yourself, what did I learn here, and how can I do things differently next time?
Okay. And it's also really important to remember, like you said earlier, we don't have to go through this alone.
Yeah.
Right?
No, not at all.
Having a good support system, whether it's friends, family, coworkers, mentors, anyone who believes in you
Mm-hmm.
and your vision.
They can give you that extra push when you need it.
Yeah, you need those people,
Definitely.
like your own personal cheer squad.
Absolutely.
Okay. And we talked about this earlier, but it's worth mentioning again, celebrating those small wins,
Oh, yeah. That's huge.
right?
Acknowledge those wins, no matter how small they seem,
Yeah,
because they really do add up.
they do.
And it keeps you motivated.
Yeah, and it helps you stay focused on the positive changes.
Exactly.
Okay. And then this brings us back to one of the most important things for making change stick. Measurement.
Yes, you got to measure your progress.
You can't just have a plan and hope for the best.
True. Yeah.
You got to actually track how things are going.
And make changes if you need to.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, Heath recommends that you pick a few really key metrics
Okay.
that align with your overall goals and track those
Progressive.
regularly.
So those are the ones that are going to show if you're actually moving towards your goal.
Exactly. And that data can help you figure out what's working and what's not, so you can tweak things as you go.
It's almost like you have a dashboard for your change efforts.
That's a great way to put it.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Dan Heath's Reset, what are some of the big takeaways that you hope listeners will remember as they start making their own changes?
Well, I think the most important thing is to remember that change is possible.
Yeah.
No matter how stuck you might feel,
You can do it.
you have the power to change things.
You don't have to do it all at once.
Yeah, start small.
Start small, experiment.
Embrace those minimum viable resets.
Love it. And don't forget to build that support system.
Celebrate those wins.
Celebrate those wins.
And keep track of how you're doing.
I love it. It's been such a great conversation. I feel like I've learned so much about change.
Me too. It's a great book.
And for anyone listening who's feeling inspired to make a change, I definitely recommend checking out Dan Heath's book, Reset.
Yes, it's full of great insights and tips.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Reset, how to change what's not working.
It's been fun.
We hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. And remember, change is a journey, not a destination.
So true.
So be kind to yourself, celebrate those wins, and we'll see you next time.